Death clings to me like a lover who refuses to let go, its fingers tracing cold patterns across my skin. I've spent so long around it that its stench has become a comfort. Death is the only promise this world keeps. The wealthy can't buy their way out. The beautiful can't seduce it. The brilliant can't outsmart it. Death just takes, indifferent to your screams. But it wasn't death itself that seduced me. It was that razor-thin moment when consciousness evaporates, when light drains from eyes like water down a sink and the chest falls into permanent stillness. My colleagues at medical school couldn't understand my choice of forensic pathology. Why not trauma surgery, they'd ask. You could actually save people. I never told them the truth, that I don't trust myself with the living. The dead don't suffer from your hesitation. They don't look at you with desperate eyes, silently begging you to do something, anything, while you stand frozen in place. They don't scream your name as chemicals dissolve them from within. No, the dead simply wait, patient and forgiving, as I excavate their secrets with steel tools and latex-covered fingers. But tonight, all of that is about to change. Tonight, I'm drowning in paperwork alone in Farewell County Hospital's basement-level morgue, the bright lights buzzing like trapped insects above my head. The sound is like the constant hum of anxiety that's lived in my skull since the Hillcross incident 8 years ago. My therapist called it hypervigilance, a symptom of PTSD that keeps your nervous system perpetually primed for disaster. As if my body somehow knew that one day the monsters in my nightmares would claw their way into reality. My sister Emma had called me earlier, her voice wrapped in that fake positivity she wears like armor, pretending the pain isn't crawling up her spine like a column of fire ants. I promised breakfast tomorrow, ignoring the need pulsing beneath her casual invitation. Maybe we can try that new place on Linden, she'd suggested. We have this dance. She pretends not to need me too much, and I pretend I'm not suffocating under the weight of my guilt. Sure, I'd replied, as long as they don't serve those pretentious avocado toasts you like. The small laugh I'd earned from her felt like a victory. But right here in the morgue, 4 bodies wait for me on gurneys, covered in sheets like presents I'll unwrap tomorrow. The most intriguing is the unscheduled arrival, a transplant recipient with experimental, eco-friendly embalming fluid the funeral home insisted on using. This case reminds me of my brother Michael's work. He would have been passionate about green alternatives to formaldehyde, probably leading the research instead of becoming one of its statistics. Sometimes I talk to these corpses as I work, telling them things I can't tell the living. You'd have loved this case, Mike, I murmur, checking the paperwork. Environmentally friendly death, right up your alley. My brother's face flashes in my mind, not the blistered, chemically ravaged version from my nightmares, but the one from 3 days before the accident, when we went hiking together near the research facility. We'd paused at the summit, sweat cooling on our skin in the autumn breeze, and he'd pointed out the sprawling Hillcross Research Complex below. That's where we're going to change the world, Gabe, he'd said, eyes bright with purpose. Our preservation techniques could double or even triple viable transport times for donor organs. He'd bumped my shoulder with his. Maybe you'll be using our solution someday when you're a hotshot surgeon. I'd nodded, not having the heart to tell him I'd already decided against surgery, that I'd already seen too much death during my hospital rotations to trust myself with split-second decisions, and that every time a patient crashed, I felt that same paralysis creeping into my limbs. Michael had seen something in me I couldn't see in myself, potential, strength, courage, all the things that evaporated the moment he needed them most. My spiraling thoughts are interrupted as my phone vibrates against the metal table, the screen lighting up with an alert that stops my heart. Statewide emergency alert. Biohazard warning. Shelter in place immediately. The message disappears in a blink, replaced by blocky hospital text. Emergency lockdown initiated. Remain where you are. Suddenly, the vents above me hiss and fall silent as the sound of air circulation, that white noise you never notice until it's gone, stops abruptly, leaving a vacuum where even my heartbeat seems too loud. Steel doors thud shut in distant corridors, and a polite female voice speaks through the speakers. Code Black. Code Black. This facility is under quarantine. In an attempt to escape, I race to the morgue doors and slam my shoulder against the push bar, but they don't budge. Instead, a tiny red light blinks at me like a mocking eye. I'm trapped, locked in with the dead. In that sudden silence, my breathing sounds obscenely loud as I press my forehead against the cold metal door, forcing myself to count each breath. 1, 2, 3 in, 1, 2, 3 out. It's the same technique Dr. Weston taught me after Hillcross, when the panic attacks would hit without warning, turning ordinary moments, the scent of cleaning chemicals, the sizzle of cooking oil, a particular quality of light through Venetian blinds, into triggers that could drop me to my knees, gasping for air that suddenly seemed toxic. Panic is just adrenaline, she'd say in her calm, measured voice. It can't hurt you unless you fight it. Let it move through you, Gabriel. Observe it without judgment. Easy for her to say. She hadn't watched her brother dissolve from the inside out. Desperate for a way out of the morgue, I discover that the wall phone emits nothing but a busy signal, and my pager flashes no signal when I try to reach security. And just then, my phone buzzes with another alert. Urgent. Farewell Hospital Morgue. Biohazard lockdown. Potential contamination. Do not approach unsecured remains. My blood turns to slush. Unsecured remains? I turn slowly toward the 4 sheet-covered gurneys. The sheets remain still, but something about them feels watchful, as if they're just waiting for me to turn my back. The transplant recipient in front of me would have been my first autopsy of the day, case number F29. His body bag is already partially unzipped from my earlier examination. The stench that escapes isn't formaldehyde, but something sickly sweet, like rancid honey mingled with the metallic tang of fresh blood. In medical school, our anatomy professor had a saying, "The body never lies." But this body tells an impossible story. The tissue seems too responsive, too present. It almost feels alive. Code Black, the overhead speaker repeats, but now there's a tremor in the manufactured voice. To all morgue personnel, remain in place. Do not open storage compartments. If you have unsealed a body, reseal it now. I comply, zipping the bag closed, backing away as I try to parse the alerts. My mind flashes to the times I was convinced that my closet was riddled with monsters, that only moved when I wasn't looking. Emma would slip into my room on those nights, 8 years old and fearless, armed with a plastic sword. "I'll protect you, Gabe," she'd declare, pajamas rumpled and hair wild from sleep. Oh, how the tables had turned. Now I was her protector, her advocate, her financial support. The one who researched experimental treatments, who bullied insurance companies, who sat beside her hospital bed during the bad weeks. And I still couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. This time, a soft clank from the far side of the morgue room freezes me mid-thought. The gurney holding case A11, overdose victim, male, 34, has shifted. Just an inch, but enough to send ice through my veins. The logical explanation is that I moved the gurney myself earlier and forgot. But logic feels fragile here, so I wheel a cart in front of the morgue door, creating a makeshift barricade. "This isn't happening," I whisper, the words hanging like prayers. But then, a soft tap resonates through the floor. Then another, almost like footsteps. I stand, gripping a heavy metal tray as a shield. The sound comes from behind a partition near the freezers, then shifts to the other side of the room, as if circling me. The transplant recipient's body bag, the one I distinctly remember zipping closed, now lies on the floor against the wall, fully unzipped. Before I can process this, the lights cut out completely, and the phone's flashlight becomes my only safety. In that sudden darkness, I hear a wet rasp of air, like someone taking their first breath after nearly drowning. I whip around, phone beam trembling, and watch as the overdose victim sits upright, sheet sliding from his torso. His eyes remain closed, head swiveling with mechanical precision until it locks in my direction. His lips part with a sick, tearing sound, releasing a moan that raises hackles on my neck. "Move, Gabriel. Move." Panic seizes my limbs, but I refuse to be paralyzed again. I've lived for 8 years in the shadow of that moment of inaction at Hillcross. Not again. Never again. I stumble backward, dropping the tray with a crash that seems to animate the second corpse, the stroke victim, a woman in her 50s. She too rises, face contorting into a mask, white eyes fixing on me with terrible hunger. My scalpels, my bone saw, they're on the tray between me and them. I lunge for the tray, shoulder bumping an overhead lamp. Metal clangs and skeletal fingers brush my sleeve. I spin, bone saw in hand, brandishing it like a talisman as the overdose victim lurches forward, mouth gaping wide enough to reveal blackened gums. His chest cavity gapes from the Y incision I made earlier, poorly sutured edges pulling apart to reveal darkness inside. He lunges, and I slash with the bone saw. The blade bites through pallid skin that parts like wet clay. Dark fluid oozes forth, not blood, too thick, too dark. The stroke victim grabs at my lab coat from behind. I whirl, shoving her away. The coat tears, and my phone clatters to the floor, its beams spinning wildly across their feet. Then, a third hand erupts from beneath a gurney, grabbing my ankle. I kick blindly, connecting with something solid. My vision tunnels with primal fear as I slam the bone saw's handle into the overdose victim's temple. Something cracks, and he slumps sideways, but only for a moment before he begins rising again. The morgue's main door remains sealed, but the supply closet in the corner might offer temporary sanctuary. So I feint right as the stroke victim lunges, then slip left toward the closet. I wrench the door open and slam it shut behind me, turning the bolt as the handle immediately begins to rattle. Their collective moans seep through the crack, a chorus of hunger and confusion. Inside the closet, I recognize the symptoms of an impending panic attack, the same ones that have plagued me since Hillcross. Dr. Weston taught me grounding techniques. 5 things I can see: shelves, cleaning supplies, a ladder, ventilation grate, my own hands. 4 things I can touch: metal door, my lab coat, cold sweat on my neck, the bone saw's handle. 3 things I can hear: moaning from outside, my own breathing, the distant hum of emergency generators. The technique steadies me enough to think. Above me, a ventilation duct beckons. I climb up on a metal stool and pry off the cover, only to find the shaft narrowing beyond reach. Useless. But from this height I spot a heavy metal shelf unit, a weapon, a chance. I position myself beside the door, fingers on the bolt. One calculated breath, then I throw it open. The sudden reversal sends the stroke victim stumbling forward, and I drive my bone saw into her shoulder, using her momentum to pivot past as the overdose victim lunges. I seize the metal shelf and ram it forward, connecting with a wet thud that buys precious seconds. I sprint for the corridor door, electronically locked. I tear open the access panel, cold fingers suddenly clamping my shoulder. Without looking, I thrust the bone saw backward, meeting resistance that gives too easily. My hands work the wires instinctively. Sparks, a click, then freedom. I throw myself through, slam the door on grasping hands, and run toward the sub-basement, descending the stairwell 2 steps at a time. Each footfall reverberates through my body like a victory. I'm moving, I'm acting, I'm not frozen. The sub-basement corridor unfolds before me like a throat. Maintenance doors line the walls, their signs barely visible under decades of institutional neglect. Experimental storage, mechanical access, restricted personnel only. I recall finding myself here months ago, lost during my first weeks at Farewell. The hospital administrator who discovered me wandering had seemed weirdly disturbed. "Nothing down here but ghosts and asbestos, Dr. Cross," he'd said, ushering me back toward the elevator with unusual urgency. "Best leave both undisturbed." Now those words resonate with prophetic weight as I walk through the shadows. Suddenly, a sound freezes me mid-step, not the moan of the reanimated pursuing me, but something more human. A soft gasping that might be sobbing, coming from behind a door left ajar. As I approach the door with the bone saw raised in the far corner, partially concealed behind a defunct air handler, movement draws my eye. "Hello?" A female voice emerges from the shadows. Is someone there? Identify yourself, I manage, my voice steadier than the trembling in my limbs. A slender figure emerges, a young woman in scrubs, her face streaked with tears and something darker that might be blood. An ID badge hangs from her neck. Leah Chen, laboratory intern. She clutches a wrench like a weapon. The sight of another living human sends a wave of relief through me so intense it borders on pain. My throat constricts with emotion I haven't allowed myself to feel in years. Connection, solidarity, the sudden fierce joy of not being alone. I got trapped, she whispers, voice cracking. I was delivering samples when the lockdown started. Then I saw them, the nurses from the 3rd floor, dragging themselves through the hallway with their eyes all wrong. I'm Gabriel, I say, lowering my weapon slightly. Forensic pathology. I was in the morgue when it started. Her eyes widen. The morgue? That's where it began. Some experimental preservative they've been testing. Patient Zero is what they called him. I overheard the research team talking about unexpected neural activity in the preserved tissue samples. My mind flashes to the transplant recipient. A man with a liver transplant, embalmed with eco-friendly fluid. She nods, shivering. They're saying the microbes in the embalming fluid mutated, somehow hijacking the nervous system. But the strangest part, they're drawn to electrical impulses, to strong emotions. Our fear feeds them, makes them stronger. The words send a chill down my spine. Fear feeding the monsters. It's almost poetically cruel. We need to find a way out, I say, scanning the room. Or somewhere to hide until help arrives. Leah shakes her head. I heard them talking about containment protocols. They're not sending help. They're sealing the hospital. Anyone inside is... She doesn't finish. Expendable. Acceptable losses to prevent wider contamination. The calculation is coldly logical, the same detachment I bring to autopsy. Cut away the infected to preserve the whole. There's a service tunnel, Leah says suddenly. Connects to the old East Wing. Most people don't know about it. I only found it because I got lost my first week. So we gather what we can, my bone saw, her wrench, a small transistor radio, and venture into that service corridor. The paranoia is familiar. As we come to a junction where 3 corridors meet, a silhouette appears, a security guard with his shoulder torn open, head lolling at an angle. His eyes reflect the red emergency lights like a nocturnal animal's. Stay behind me, I whisper, approaching with the bone saw raised. The guard stands motionless, as if listening. The corridor is narrow. We might be able to slip past if he remains still. 3 steps closer, and I see the true extent of his injuries. Not just his shoulder, but his entire torso has been savaged, uniform hanging in tatters from a body that should be incapable of standing. A pipe bursts somewhere behind us with a metallic clang, and the guard's head snaps in our direction, empty eyes finding us in the gloom. His mouth stretches open, releasing a moan that seems to echo from somewhere deep inside his hollow chest. I swing the bone saw, catching him in the side. He stumbles but recovers almost instantly, hands grasping for my throat. Leah rushes forward and brings the wrench down on his skull with a sickening crack. This time he collapses, limbs twitching. After sprinting past him, deeper into the sub-basement's maze, we eventually reach a set of double doors marked Extended Storage Morgue. My stomach drops. Another morgue, likely overflow storage for research subjects. We can't go in there, Leah pleads, if that's where they keep the test subjects. But distant moans from the corridor behind us leave no choice. So we step right in. Inside the second morgue, metal racks line the walls, each holding multiple body bags. Some are strapped upright, at least a dozen black zippered forms hanging like grotesque chrysalides. Many bear neon tags reading Donor Program E-Fluid, the same experimental compound used on Patient Zero. Gabriel, Leah whispers, pointing to a bag that shifts slightly, fabric undulating as if something inside is stirring. We edge around it, giving the widest berth possible. A soft sound makes my skin crawl. The zipper was opening from the inside. Pallid fingers emerge from the opening, followed by a thin arm marked with greenish veins. Leah pulls me toward a maintenance door at the far end of the room. It's locked from the outside, but I wedge the bone saw into the frame. The door groans but doesn't give. Behind us, the woman has extracted herself fully from the bag, her movements jerky but purposeful. Other bags begin to stir in response, a domino effect of awakening. I throw my weight against the saw. The door frame splinters, then gives way with a crack. We tumble through, slamming it shut behind us as a chorus of moans rises to a fevered pitch. The corridor beyond leads to an old pharmaceutical storage area. We collapse against a wall, lungs burning. "What is this place?" Leah gasps between breaths. "Pharmaceutical storage, maybe," I reply. "Probably abandoned during a hospital renovation." In the dim light, Leah's face is pale but composed. She reminds me of Michael in Crisis, the same steady focus beneath the fear. 3 days before the Hillcross accident, we'd gone hiking together. Michael had spotted a rattlesnake on the path before I did, grabbing my shoulder to stop me from stepping on it. "Don't move," he'd said, voice carefully controlled. "Just breathe." He'd guided us both safely backward, one step at a time. That methodical calm in the face of danger. I see it now in Leah's eyes. "You're a doctor," she says suddenly. "If you had to guess, is this contained to the hospital? Or could it spread?" The question dredges up memories of infection control lectures, epidemiology studies. "Depends on the transmission vector," I say. "If it's just the fluid itself, containment is possible. But if it's airborne, or if even one carrier escapes..." I don't finish. We both know what it means: a cascade effect, exponential spread, zombie apocalypse. Suddenly, the lights flicker, and a power surge ripples through the emergency systems. In that brief illumination, I glimpse something that makes my blood freeze. At the far end of the storage room, another figure stands motionless, as if it hasn't noticed us. "Leah," I whisper, nodding in that direction. We back away, step by careful step, but a shelf bumps my spine, sending a bottle crashing to the floor. The figure's head snaps up, and it moves with terrible purpose in our direction. "Run!" I hiss, shoving Leah toward a side passage. We sprint through the darkness, guided only by the light of her phone. Behind us, footsteps accelerate, not the shambling gait of the morgue corpses, but a purposeful run. This one is different, faster. The passage ends at a sealed door with a keypad lock. "Service tunnel access," reads the faded sign above it. "The code," Leah gasps. "I don't know the code." The pursuer's footsteps grow louder. I push Leah behind me, raising the bone saw. "Stay back. When I engage it, you run. Find another way." "I'm not leaving you," she insists, gripping the wrench. Her loyalty strikes a chord, so different from the clinical detachment I've cultivated since Hillcross. After the accident, I withdrew from friends, from relationships. Easier to exist in isolation than risk failing someone else. But this stranger refuses to abandon me, even facing death. "Don't argue. Emma needs someone to tell her." I swallow hard. Tell her I didn't freeze this time. The figure rounds the corner, and in the dim light I see it's not a reanimated corpse at all, but a living man in a blood-spattered lab coat. His eyes are wild, face gaunt with exhaustion. "Wait," he shouts, hands raised. "Don't, I'm not one of them." We hesitate, weapons raised. He stops several feet away, breathing hard. "Dr. Morris," he introduces himself. "Microbiology. I've been tracking the outbreak." "Why should we trust you?" I demand, not lowering the bone saw. "Because I know how to stop them," he replies simply. "And I need your help to do it." So after a few moments of letting our adrenaline cool down, with no other choice but to trust him, we let Dr. Morris lead us to a small laboratory hidden behind a reinforced door. Inside, microscopes and computer equipment suggest recent use. The lab reminds me of the Hillcross facility. The same sterile order, the same underlying hubris. Science pushing boundaries without fully understanding the consequences. How many times had Michael expressed concerns about their safety protocols, only to be assured that everything was under control, the same reassurances that meant nothing when containment failed. This was my research facility, Morris explains, securing the door behind us. I was studying the E-fluid's properties when patient 0 showed the first signs of reanimation. You created this nightmare? Leah's voice trembles with accusation. Morris shakes his head. The fluid was developed by PharmaCorp for organ preservation. My team was contracted to study its long-term effects. We noticed anomalies, cellular activity where there should be none, but corporate pushed for continued testing. His words strike a nerve. How many times had I heard similar justifications in the aftermath of Hillcross? The research director, testifying at the inquiry, we followed established protocols. The corporation's statement, unforeseen complications, as if language could sanitize catastrophe, as if bureaucratic phrases could absorb the weight of human suffering. The microbe evolved, Morris continues. It developed the ability to generate electrical impulses similar to nerve signals. Essentially, it's colonizing the bodies, using them as vessels. On a monitor inside Morris's lab, grainy security footage shows corridors filling with shambling figures. The hospital has become a hive of the undead. And feeding on our fear, I add. Morris nods grimly. The microbe responds to electromagnetic fields, including those generated by strong emotional states. Fear, panic, rage, they're like beacons. How do we stop them? Leah asks. The generator room, Morris replies. If we cut power to the entire facility, we might slow them down. Their ability to coordinate seems dependent on electrical fields. Will that let us escape? I press. Morris hesitates. Potentially, but there's a complication. The generator room is near the main research lab where patient 0 is being kept. My stomach drops. The transplant recipient? Yes, he was our first test subject, and he's different from the others, more coordinated, almost intelligent. The words conjure an image of Michael in his final moments, his eyes wide with understanding, his hand gripping mine as if trying to communicate something beyond pain, an awareness that transcended his dissolving body. Is that what awaits us with patient 0? Not mindless reanimation, but something more horrific, death with awareness, corruption with intent. I'll go, I say firmly. I'll shut down the generators. Not alone, Leah insists, stepping forward. Morris shakes his head. It's a death mission. Patient 0 has already killed 3 of my colleagues who tried to reach the controls. Then what's your solution? I demand. We wait for external containment, military intervention. They'll bomb this place to ash, I cut in. You heard the radio. They're establishing a quarantine perimeter, not sending rescue teams. Morris doesn't deny it. His silence is confirmation enough. I'm going, I repeat. Emma needs me to come home. The words feel strange on my tongue. For years, I've carried the weight of my sister's condition as penance. Our weekly lunches, the financial support I provide, the medical connections I leverage for her, all attempts to atone for my paralysis at Hillcross. But now, facing the end of everything, I realize it's more than guilt that drives me. It's love. Simple, messy, human love. Morris reluctantly produces a key card. This will get you to the generator level, but once the power goes, I can't guarantee the emergency exits will function. He opens a cabinet and removes a small canister. Industrial disinfectant, highly corrosive. The microbe seems vulnerable to it. Use it if you encounter patient 0. One last thing, Morris adds. There's a communication terminal in the generator room. Send an emergency override signal. It might trigger the hospital's external emergency systems, alert nearby facilities. Morris checks the security feeds. The path should be clear for now, but they're everywhere and they're learning. Be careful. And remember, fear feeds them. Easy to say, impossible to practice. Fear isn't just an emotion for me. It's been my default state since watching my brother die. The baseline hum beneath every interaction, every decision. How do you stop feeling something that's become part of your foundation? As we prepare to leave, Leah touches my arm. If we don't make it, she says softly, I want you to know I'm glad I'm not alone. We'll make it, I reply, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. And then I'm buying you breakfast. There's this place on Linden that Emma likes. They do ridiculous things with avocados. She smiles, a brief flicker of humanity in this hellscape. I hate avocados, she confesses, but I'd love to try it anyway. The journey to the generator level is a nightmare of narrow corridors and heart-stopping encounters. We move silently, freezing at every sound. Morris's keycard grants us access through security doors, each one bringing us closer to both potential salvation and patient zero. Twice we're forced to confront the reanimated. With each encounter, I feel something inside me hardening. These aren't people anymore, I tell myself. They're vessels, puppets. The real horror isn't what I'm doing to them, but what's already been done. The brutality required for survival reminds me of Emma's words after particularly grueling physical therapy sessions. Sometimes healing looks like destruction, she'd say, her body shaking with exhaustion. You have to break down to build back up. But are we healing anything here, or just postponing the inevitable? At last, we descend a final stairwell, with pipes overhead leaking condensation that falls like tears. At the bottom, a heavy door marked Electrical Systems Authorized Personnel Only blocks our path. Again, Morris's keycard grants us access with a soft beep. Inside, massive diesel generators hum. The central control panel glows with indicator lights, a Christmas tree of green and red diodes. Across the room, a bank of monitors displays security feeds from around the hospital. Most show empty corridors or static, but one captures a disturbing scene. A group of reanimated staff and patients moving with unnerving coordination, as if responding to unheard commands. There, Leah points to a large red switch behind a protective cover. Emergency shutdown. The communication terminal first, Leah reminds me. We need to send the alert before killing the power. I type furiously, navigating menu systems. Biohazard outbreak, reanimation of deceased, experimental compound E fluid source, quarantine Farewell County Hospital, potential spread imminent. My finger hovers over the send button. Will anyone believe such an outlandish warning? I press send, watching as confirmation codes scroll across the screen. Now the power, I say, turning back to the shutdown switch. But a sudden crash from the doorway freezes us both. The heavy door we secured behind us buckles inward, metal groaning under immense pressure. Another crash, and the hinges begin to tear free. They found us, Leah whispers. How? The switch, I urge, pushing Leah toward the control panel. Shut it down, now. The door gives way with a final shriek of tortured metal. In the gap stands a figure that stops my heart. The transplant recipient, patient zero, his body glistening with that strange green fluid. Behind him, there is a crowd of other reanimated corpses, but they maintain a respectful distance, like followers awaiting instruction from their prophet. Patient zero steps forward, movement smooth, nothing like the jerky shambling of the others. His eyes fix on mine, intelligent, aware, calculating. Gabriel Cross, he says, my name a wet rasp that somehow forms perfect words. We've been waiting for you. My name. He knows my name. Your fear has a signature, he continues, studying me with the clinical detachment I recognize from my own autopsy work. I can sense it radiating from you like heat from a flame. The others can only detect its presence, but I can read its specific frequency. Each word cuts into my consciousness like a scalpel. Behind me, Leah works frantically at the shutdown panel. I step forward, placing myself between her and Zero, bone saw raised. You're not real, I say, voice steadier than I feel. You're just a microbe, a parasite playing puppet master. Zero laughs, a sound like water bubbling through a corpse's lungs. Oh, I'm very real, Gabriel. More real than I ever was in life. The E-fluid didn't just preserve me, it evolved me. He taps his temple with a finger that moves too fluidly, too precisely. Old consciousness, new awareness. I can feel them all now, every reanimated body in this building, extensions of myself. We're going to shut you down, I say, gesturing with the bone saw. Cut off your power source. Temporary inconvenience, Zero replies with a dismissive wave. The microbe adapts. We'll find other sources, other hosts. His gaze shifts to Leah, then back to me. Starting with you two. Your sister, he says suddenly. Emma, isn't it? You carry her image so close to the surface of your thoughts. The wheelchair, the weekly breakfasts, the way her eyes follow you with such hope. How did you know about... I start, but he cuts me off with a gesture that seems almost gentle. Memories are just electrical patterns, he says. Radio waves at their most basic level, and I've become quite the receiver. His lips curl into what might be a smile on a human face. Your guilt sustains you, Gabriel. It's the bedrock of your identity. She haunts you more thoroughly than any ghost could. The panic I've been suppressing threatens to overwhelm me, surging upward through my chest like a geyser. Don't let it feed him, I tell myself. Control it. Contain it. Compartmentalize. I focus on the steady rhythm of Leah's movements behind me, the small sounds of her struggle with the panel. She needs time. I have to give her time. But just then, Zero lunges with sudden, vicious speed. I barely manage to bring the bone saw up, the blade catching him across the chest. Dark fluid wells from the wound, but he doesn't slow. His hand closes around my throat, lifting me as if I weigh nothing. The saw clatters from my grasp. Gabriel! Leah screams. Zero slams me against the control panel, stars exploding behind my eyes. Through the haze of pain, I see Leah raise the wrench, bringing it down on Zero's arm with all her strength. Bone snaps, but his grip doesn't loosen. Brave, he comments, almost appreciative. With his free hand, he backhands her across the room. She crashes into a bank of monitors, glass shattering. My vision tunnels, lungs burning for air. Zero leans close, his breath like a morgue freezer. I could keep you alive, he whispers. Make you watch as we spread. Think of it as a front row seat to evolution. The edges of my consciousness begin to darken as my oxygen-starved brain shuts down. In this liminal space between awareness and oblivion, time dilates, seconds stretching to infinity. I see Michael's face, not as he was in death but on his 21st birthday, drunk on cheap beer and possibility, arms slung around my shoulders as he told me about his dreams of changing the world. I see Emma the summer before Hillcross, pirouetting in a sundress across the backyard, her legs strong and sure, moving with a grace that would soon be taken from her. I see my mother at Michael's funeral, her grief so absolute it seemed to bend light around her, distorting reality. I didn't save them then, and no matter what I do, I can't save them now. With a spark of renewed life, my hand closes around the disinfectant canister still clipped to my belt, and with the last of my strength, I bring it up and spray directly into Zero's face. The chemical hits his eyes, his open mouth. He screams, a sound so inhuman it seems to vibrate the air itself, and releases me. I drop to the floor, gasping. Zero claws at his face, the corrosive liquid eating through necrotic tissue, revealing glimpses of skull beneath dissolving flesh. The other corpses surge forward, responding to their master's distress like antibodies rushing to an infection site. Their movements become more coordinated as his pain intensifies, the electromagnetic bond between them strengthening under duress, like a hive mind crystallizing in crisis. I crawl toward Leah, who lies motionless among broken glass, a dark stain spreading across her scrubs. Leah, I croak, throat raw. Leah, get up. Her eyes flutter open, face pale beneath a smear of blood. The switch, she manages, voice barely audible above the cacophony of moans. I grab the fallen bone saw and stagger back to the control panel. The protective cover resists for a moment before giving way beneath my adrenaline-fueled strength. Behind me, Zero recovers, his face partially dissolved to reveal grinning bone beneath. You can't stop what's already begun, he snarls, advancing with jerky, determined steps. His smooth coordination deteriorates as the disinfectant wreaks havoc on his tissues, but the intelligence in his eyes remains. My hand closes around the shutdown lever. Watch me. As I pull it down with every ounce of my remaining energy, for a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then the generators sputter, cough, and fall silent. The lights die, plunging the room into absolute darkness. A collective moan rises from the reanimated, confusion replacing coordination. In the pitch black, I hear them shuffling aimlessly, bumping into equipment, into each other. Patient Zero's voice rises above the chaos, trying to maintain control, but it sounds weaker, less certain. "No," he howls, the word dissolving into a bestial growl. "You've merely delayed the inevitable. The microbe will adapt. It always adapts." With no time or interest to watch what happens next, I run away and fumble through darkness to where Leah fell. "Can you walk?" I whisper, finding her hand amidst broken glass and congealing blood. "I think so," she mumbles, fingers gripping mine with surprising strength. Guided by touch alone, as we crawl through the dark, behind us the moans of the dead grow more desperate, more confused. Without electrical fields to guide them, the reanimated are losing cohesion, their movements becoming more random, less purposeful. My hand touches a doorframe, then a push bar, the emergency exit. I press against it, praying it's not electronically locked. Miraculously, the door swings open to reveal a stairwell, illuminated by battery-powered exit signs. "Up," I urge, helping Leah to her feet. We ascend as quickly as her injuries allow, leaving the darkness and its inhabitants behind. As we reach ground level, after what feels like hours, the exit door opens onto a loading dock where the pre-dawn air hits us like a revelation. Stars still speckle the sky, though the horizon shows the first hint of gray. The parking lot is chaos, police barricades, military vehicles, hazmat teams establishing a perimeter. Spotlights sweep the hospital facade, catching us in their glare. A cluster of armed responders spots us, weapons raised. As we stagger forward, a medic rushes up with a stretcher, seeing Leah's battered form. The outbreak has breached containment. Bodies lie scattered across the pavement, some wrapped in plastic like discarded secrets. They hustle us to a triage tent, forcibly separating us. Leah disappears into a haze of hazmat suits and flashing lights. I collapse to my knees, the gravel biting into flesh, that small pain the only tether keeping me anchored to reality. Then, in my pocket, something strange pulses. I reach in, discovering a vial I don't remember taking, stolen from the lab in that liminal space between terror and revelation. Inside, embalming fluid swirls with faint light, like a tiny universe of corruption and possibility. The transplant microbe, distilled, concentrated, felt sentient in its own terrible way. The realization washes over me. This microbial strain might be corrupted, but its original purpose was tissue preservation, cellular stabilization. Emma's deteriorating nervous system might respond to a vastly diluted dose, might halt the progressive death of her motor neurons. My hands tremble around the glass tube. Then a phone materializes before me, thrust into my trembling hand by a paramedic who says the words "emergency contact" with clinical detachment. My chest constricts. Emma. I press the phone to my ear, anticipation swelling. I have the vial. I might be able to save her. Her voice breaks through the static, fragile but present, real. "Gabriel?" Emma's voice is thin, stretched like skin over bone, but unmistakably hers. "They said you were at Blackwood Memorial, the outbreak." Words fail me. She's alive. Still here. The seizures didn't take her. Not yet. "I'm okay," I manage, though nothing could be further from truth. "Are you?" "I had another episode," she interrupts, her words slurring slightly at the edges, the disease's fingerprints on her speech. "They thought I might not, but I'm still here, still fighting." The irony crashes through me. While I battled the undead, she fought her own body's betrayal. "Emma, I found something," I whisper, tightening my grip on the vial. "Something that might help you. It's experimental, dangerous, but no." The word is soft but absolute. "No more experiments, Gabe. That's not why I called." The vial still pulses against my palm, its contents shimmering with unnatural light. "I stole something," I confess, voice cracking. something that reanimates dead tissue. It might help you, but it might turn you into... No, she says again, gentler this time. Whatever it is, whatever you found, that's not our answer. Come home, she says softly. Bring your nightmares, bring your guilt, bring everything, but come home. As if something clicks inside me, I open my hand, letting the vial fall to the pavement. It shatters, its contents hissing as they touch the ground. I'm coming home, I tell her, rising on legs that feel suddenly stronger. Wait for me. So as they lead me away from the broken vial, I understand something I never could have learned from textbooks or autopsies. Death is not the enemy. The enemy is the refusal to accept our transience, our impermanence. The necromantic science that created the outbreak was born from the same impulse that made me steal that vial, the desperate need to deny the natural order, to cheat the system, to have more time at any cost. I will go home to Emma. I will sit with her through whatever comes next, seizures, decline, perhaps even death. But I will not turn away. I will not seek chemical escape or artificial solutions. I will be present in the way I couldn't be for Michael, in the way I almost wasn't for her tonight. Because presence, true, unflinching presence, is the only real victory possible in a world where death always collects its due. That's the end of this story. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to my channel would help me out more than you can imagine. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.